Welcome to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith. It's holiday time, and 'tis the season when many tables make turkey and ham the center stage of the table. But quietly tucked next to those leading characters is a quiet supporting cast member, the sweet potato. Yes, this is the season when sweet potatoes can be found in many forms and fashions on the holiday table, from mashed, roasted with brown sugar and melted marshmallows, and even in the form of sweet potato pie. This superfood vegetable is not just for the holidays. Sweet potatoes are packed with beta-carotene, vitamin C, potassium, and even fiber, which makes it a great option for the health-conscientious consumer. On this episode of FieldLink, we travel to Louisiana to catch up with Helena representatives James DeMoss, Hodges and Madison Lachney to learn how this nutrient-packed root is raised in their region. Madison will even share some unique ways that Cajun cooks incorporate sweet potatoes in their diets. Plus, as a bonus, we head over to Starkville, Mississippi to catch up with PhD graduate student Alyssa Miller to deep dive into her latest herbicide research for sweet potato production, and we'll also visit with her about other research that's taking place around sweet potatoes at Mississippi State. Finally, Jody Lawrence joins us from Nashville to discuss the latest in commodity markets and how the new administration may impact markets. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink. This episode of FieldLink is brought to you by Resgenix, the new water management tool from the Helena Products Group. Improve soil aggregation and irrigation efficiency. Manage every drop with Resgenix. Contact your Helena representative to learn more. And welcome back to this episode of FieldLink. We're really excited today as we approached Thanksgiving time. We're going to talk about sweet potatoes and sweet potato production, specifically in the state of Louisiana. And we've got three guests joining us today on this particular episode. We have James DeMoss, who's joining us. He is a Helena Products Manager, and Hodges is down in Lake Providence, Louisiana. And of course, Madison Lachney is joining us from the Thibodaux branch in St. Martinville, Louisiana. Guys, welcome to FieldLink.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thank you for having us on.
Hey guys, it's that time of year. Holidays are around us. And, one of the typical things that's celebrated north to south, east to west, is a serving of sweet potatoes on almost every family's table. And today we're going to talk a little bit about sweet potato production, specifically in Louisiana on this particular segment. And we're going to start off with James. James DeMoss, tell us a little bit about you and where's home. Tell us a little bit about sweet potato production in your market.
I live in Bossier City, Louisiana. I'm the product manager for all of Louisiana and South Arkansas. I've been with the company for 28 years, been a product manager for about 5 years. Before that, I was in Agri-Intelligence. As far as sweet potatoes go, our sweet potato industry in Louisiana, in the past, it was more of basically trying to sell for retail markets. And so a lot of sizing and quality was concerned. A lot of our sweet potato production has really gone into canning, or we have some interesting new pieces where they produce sweet potatoes for sweet potato fries. So trying to get the uniformities went down, and it's more basically about pounds per acre. We have some very unique markets in our area. There's a big market down in Southwest Louisiana. Then we have a really big grower basically in the on the eastern side of the state. Then we have some also sweet potato production in the northeast side of the state, where we traditionally are growing sweet potatoes in some sandy ground. And the growers, like I said, it's not really a popular crop, but when you start having some 400 acres or some 5,000-6,000 acre farmers, or even some 2,000 or 3,000 acre farmers, it becomes a significant crop in our state.
Yeah, it's definitely a growing market from our research. As you mentioned, sweet potato fries have really changed the game a lot for that particular product. But, we're seeing it incorporated into lots of different dishes. Research shows that, we've got a tremendous health advantage with sweet potatoes. And it's definitely picking up across, the whole South, but also in other parts of the country, including California and North Carolina. Joining us also is Blade Hodges. Blade, you get to work with growers on a day-to-day basis, sweet potato producers, that is. What are some of the big challenges from a fertility standpoint that your producers deal with on a day-to-day basis?
That's right. Like he said, my name is Blade Hodges, and I'm an agri-intelligence area technician in Northeast Louisiana. I cover the Lake Providence branch. Been doing this for about 5 years now, and like James said, also there's very few farmers that actually farm sweet potatoes, but in my area there are a handful of core guys over in on the Macon Ridge is what it's called in my area in West Carroll Parish mostly. But as far as fertility, they are very good about putting out a big slug of dry fertilizer, very balanced NP and K blend at the beginning before they plant, and then usually they'll pull plastic and then maybe another smaller shot as soon as they plant. And then they really do a good job of foliar feeding throughout the season as the crop needs certain things. And that's where my job comes in is in agri-intelligence is pulling tissue samples to see what exactly it needs on a demand basis. But also we have a program that we run as well throughout the year of foliar feeds that Helena sells that are designed for key timings in that crop.
Blade, when do growers particularly, I guess, plant sweet potatoes in your market in Louisiana?
Generally in the spring, just like other later in the spring, like other grain crops, but it's way more labor intensive. It's not just the seed. You have to plant the seed in like a greenhouse and get the slips is what they call it. Get those started, and then they have to transplant them out in the field, usually manually on some kind of setter is what they call it, with a lot of people involved.
So a lot of hands-on activity with that particular planting production.
Yes, no doubt. Planting and harvesting are very manual labor type events, unless certain growers have more mechanized systems, but it really just depends on the grower that you talk to.
Sure. Blake, you also talked a little bit about fertility and the importance of fertility. And as an agri-intelligence specialist, you're dealing with lots of soil sampling from our high ground program as well as extractor on the tissue sampling. What kind of trends do you see in Louisiana when it comes to sweet potatoes? And what is that plant really hungry for and what's sometimes short?
Especially in the ground, like James said, that we plant sweet potatoes in is very sandier, usually a lot sandier ground. And usually, sweet potatoes' number one macronutrient that it needs is potassium or potash. And a lot of times in that sandier ground, lower CECs, cation exchange capacity, and we'll need more potassium anyways. It's usually really low in those soils.
And what kind of products are you guys using to help, I guess, offset some of those things?
Usually in that case, like I said, they put out a really big blend early on, so we put a lot of potash in it, just a dry commodity. But then a lot of our foliar fertilizers also have potassium in them as well.
You bet. And I'm going to pull James back in here. James, one of the things that you've been exploring and working with a lot of sweet potato growers in Louisiana is introducing, water is important and water management is very critical for this particular crop. Resgenics, it's a new product produced by Helena, the Helena Products Group. How's it impacting growers in your market?
Well, Resgenics, as Bill said, is a new product that we've had. Actually, really launched it this year and kind of played with it the last year. But some of the things we started to see, especially with sweet potatoes, is we work with a lot of the research and extension, or as LSU, and they put out some Resgenics demonstration plots for us this year. And when they planted the slips this year, they planted the slips and they went and treated these trials and they put out Resgenics in different areas. And then within about a week, the researcher called and said, y'all need to come take a look at this. Y'all are onto something. And from what we've first seen is when you plant a slip or a sweet potato, you really want that thing to start taking off and growing and binding out. And usually what happens is when you plant them, they kind of have a setback from going from that shock. And the ends of the plants start dampening off and they really don't take off. But what we noticed is with the Resgenics piece is where we applied it, we had more tilt. The soil was a lot more mellower. And those plants that was treated with Resgenics, they took off. They never stopped back. They never had no dampening off at the end. They started vining, which is what you want them to do, and it really put them off in the races. So that was a very unique piece. The other thing that's really important with sweet potatoes is they have a very thin skin, and you can easily bruise them or scrape them, whatever, which is not a good thing because that's where you can have disease, insects, and other pressures penetrate those plants when you harvest them, which also can affect the grade and the pay quality. But what we've noticed with Resgenics is where we put that out there, it really flocculates that soil. It makes that soil exceptionally mellow. So when you harvest it, it makes the harvesting easier. There's less bruising, there's less damage to the skin. And we've actually seen an increase in production with this piece just from the utilization of the nutrients and the water that's associated with it. And with that mellowness of the ground and giving that good soil tilt, it just makes harvesting really a breeze compared to what it usually is.
I think that's a really good, important point. When we talk to a lot of folks, we talk about Resgenics and the water management components of it, and it's really important. It does a great job for helping, better manage water. But some of the side benefits, as you mentioned, James, mellowing that soil out, especially with a tuber crop like a sweet potato, where boy, just the harvestability, freeing that soil up and making it a little bit more mellower, especially when we harvest that potato and we can minimize some of the bruising on a crop like that. It's so important from the financial viability of it.
You're exactly right. I mean, if you can give anything to help aid in the harvest of sweet potatoes to make it easier, to have less damage to your final product, that's always a win every day, because after you harvest them, they put them in these boxes and they put them in the sheds through a certain period. And if there's no damage to that skin, there's no external insects or disease that can, even though you can be impacted with insects and disease during season, you can also have some disease pressure even after you set them up for storage for a short time. And when you have that tilth that you need and the mellowness of that soil, that's a huge important piece in sweet potato production.
Blade, I'm going to jump back to you. As you talk to producers, as we're, getting ready to flip the calendar here fairly soon into 2025, what's the energy and the uptake about sweet potato production in Louisiana? Do you see more acres in the future, or do you see it maintaining? What's your insight there?
As far as in my area goes, I do see it maintaining. I have heard a little bit about some contracts going down a little bit with certain companies that are doing the sweet potato fries, but they can still, so if they're solely doing sweet potato fries, their acres might go down a little bit to not have any waste on their potatoes. But a lot of guys once they fill their contracts of their sweet potato fries, usually it's not as easy like grain is to, once you fill your contract, go get another one. That is the case sometimes, but usually they just come up with a lot of different creative ways to sell sweet potatoes, whether it's feeding wildlife or even, going to farmers markets, sizing out the more desirable ones to eat for people, and they'll take them and box them up and sell them any kind of way they can, really.
Blade, you said a key word there, creative ways, looking for different creative ways to use sweet potatoes. And there's a lot of creative ways to utilize sweet potatoes. And that's where we're going to bring our resident Cajun cook, Madison Lachney, in. And Madison, you've got some unique ways of utilizing sweet potatoes the Cajun way.
Yes, that's correct, Bill. I'm from Lafayette, Louisiana. I work out of our Thibodaux, Louisiana branch. So it's pretty far down here in the South. So I don't deal with sweet potatoes on an everyday basis, but my family worked on sweet potato farms growing up back around central Louisiana. And so basically growing up, we probably ate sweet potatoes in more traditional ways, baking, roasting, mainly with gumbo. You didn't eat gumbo without a sweet potato. But I guess now one of the newer, more interesting ways to cook them is in a crawfish boil. Nothing says Louisiana like crawfish and sweet potatoes, right? So basically all you're doing is you can cut your sweet potatoes in half, poke a few holes in them. You have your water boiling, you have all your seasoning and everything in it, and throw the sweet potatoes in, boil them for a little while, 5 minutes. Then you can put your crawfish in, you boil them about another 5 to 10 minutes or so. And when the crawfish are done, you cut the pot and you let everything soak in the seasoning for about another 30 minutes. And by that time, the sweet potato really absorbs the crawfish seasoning, and it's sweet with a little bit of kick is how I like to say it.
Sweet with a little bit of kick. That's the Cajun way. Is that right, Madison?
That's right.
Well, definitely a lot of ways to consume sweet potatoes, and as we talked about on this episode, we've talked about fried sweet potato fries. They're very, very popular. Now we have the Cajun way of, incorporating sweet potatoes in your diet. course, as you all mentioned, there's a lot of traditional ways to utilize them, especially during the holidays and season. We have sweet potato pie. We have sweet potato, roasted sweet potatoes. We have it, into casseroles with my family has marshmallows melted all over them. So it's kind of tough to beat on a holiday dinner afternoon. So, guys, I want to thank you for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink as we get ready for sweet potato time and the holiday seasons and sharing a little bit of the Cajun way how sweet potatoes can be incorporated into your diet.
Thanks, Bill, for having us. We appreciate you letting us be on the show.
Thank you, Bill. I enjoyed it.
Yep. Thanks, Bill. I enjoyed it.
And welcome back to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith, and joining us today in the FieldLink studio is Alyssa Miller. Alyssa is a PhD student in wheat science at Mississippi State, and she's doing a lot of research on sweet potatoes. Alyssa, welcome to the FieldLink studio.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's awesome to have you here in the studio today to talk about sweet potatoes and some of the research that you're doing at Mississippi State on this really interesting crop. But before we dive there, let's talk a little bit more about Alyssa and talk about, how did you even get involved into doing research on sweet potatoes? Where's home? Where'd you get started?
So I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and how I became getting into agriculture, I guess, is kind of a weird background story. So as a kid, I've always loved growing up, being outside all day long, playing in the dirt. I used to actually play this game I would call Survivor and just try to go out and live off the land for the whole day and see what I could dig up that way. But I love agriculture because it brings a lot of my interests and fascinations into one aspect. So I really enjoy food, cooking and eating, and of course, where does our food come from?
Right.
Agriculture. I also love weather, especially extreme weather, and weather plays a massive role in agriculture and how your season will go. So it just brings a lot of my interests together into one. Another thing I really enjoy about agriculture is, to me, it seems like a big mystery that we're trying to solve. There are so many factors that play a role in this that we have to look at every single factor in order to figure out what's going on. So that is why I really do enjoy agriculture.
It's been quite a journey for you. You did your undergraduate at Arkansas and transitioned from hospitality management and also in meteorology and, made your way to Mississippi State to study weed science. And it goes back to kind of figuring out that mystery a little bit, doesn't it?
Yes, it definitely did take me a little while to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. But sometimes in life, you just kind of trip over a little things and you end up where you're supposed to be. And I really do believe I'm supposed to be in the field of agriculture. Every day is different. You really don't know what is going to happen. You have to really be on your toes. It's a very, very fun industry. And you get to help the farmers and help everyone in the world because everyone has to eat. So it's just a very rewarding field to be in.
Well, it's definitely a sustainable industry. We've got to continue to feed people. And you're doing a lot of really unique research at Mississippi State on sweet potatoes. Specifically, you're working in the herbicide trials and doing a ton of research there. But before we go there, why sweet potatoes? What kind of drew you into this area, and why is this crop so important to agriculture and really to their consumers?
So sweet potatoes are a very important crop. And actually, Mississippi is the third top producing state in the country for sweet potato production. Sweet potatoes, as many do know, they're very high in fiber, vitamin A, vitamin C, potassium, and you can get them at the grocery store for pretty cheap. So you have a massive amount of nutrients in just a cheap vegetable.
Right.
So it can feed the world. It can help with poverty in different aspects of the world, like Africa, for instance. Sweet potato production there is very useful. But we want to protect this crop because growers will not want to continue to produce a crop that's not making them money. There's a lot of inputs that go into sweet potato production. It's a very labor-intensive crop, from planting, from the slip beds, from harvesting, from curing the potatoes, and also storage. There's a lot of money that goes into it. So, of course, in the field during the growing season, we want to have many herbicide chemistries that are labeled.
Sure.
We're working on that because it's very important, especially with weed resistance. So if we're only using a small toolbox of only a few herbicides, at the moment 11 are labeled in Mississippi, therefore weed resistance is definitely more of a possibility if we are continuing to use the same chemistries over and over and over. So that is why we need more chemistries to be labeled to help with that. And also, there aren't many post-applied herbicides labeled in sweet potato production as well, so that gives growers a problem during the growing season where they can't use anything that will help control their weeds when that crop is in the ground.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned earlier as we were prepping for this podcast, of the 11 herbicides, only a few are really labeled for post. If you're lucky, is that right?
Yes, that is true. And a lot of them don't even control many broadleaf weeds. A lot of them are for grasses. Now, there are some that will control your broadleaf weeds, but that's something we're working on in my herbicide screening study as well, to find some herbicide chemistries we can get labeled that won't injure the sweet potato, it won't affect the yield, but will help control those broadleafs, especially for post-application, for post-transplant of that crop.
And sweet potatoes, it's a part of the morning glory family. That poses some other challenges for you as a weed scientist.
Yes, it certainly does. So sweet potato is a part of the morning glory family, otherwise known as the Convolvulentiae family. And there is a weed family but a weed group, let's say, that is also a part of that same exact family, the morning glory species.
Okay.
And that does pose a threat to the sweet potato crop because that weed is very hard to control, be it in the same family. It's hard to find herbicide chemistries that will only control the morning glory weed, yet not harm the sweet potato crop. So that is something we're trying to figure out, something to help that problem.
So tell us a little bit about some of the research. How did you get started with the herbicide research trials, and how long do they exist, and what are you kind of seeing at this stage of the game?
Yeah, so first of all, we started a greenhouse herbicide trial. So we had 4 different varieties of sweet potatoes, and we sprayed them in the spray chamber located at Mississippi State, and we used 2 different rates. Now, this rate, the 1X rate, which we consider, was gathered from either if this chemistry was labeled in potato crops or other vegetable crops. And if not, we then veered towards your corn, cotton, soybean, those rates to help determine what exact rate we should apply for our 1X. And then, of course, we had a 1/2X as well. And those were sprayed over the top on sweet potato plants that were transplanted. It allowed 3 weeks to establish in their pots. And then after that, we looked at the different percentage of injury to these plants, the type of injury, as well as the vine length and the root and shoot weight for that.
Wow. And so after you went from the greenhouse, you actually went out to the field and did some applications out there.
That is correct. So I like to think it's all good and dandy in the greenhouse, but how is it going to work in a field atmosphere, which would be realistic? That's what growers will do. Growers are not going to grow an entire crop of sweet potatoes in the greenhouse.
Right.
I mean, I guess that's how the slips are grown, but we're not going to get into that, I guess.
Sure.
But in the field, that's very important because then we can look at yield, which is one of the most important factors for this study. If the sweet potato plant, it may not look injured, but the yield still could be affected by that herbicide. So that's something we really need to look at. So in this, we do also have a control. The greenhouse had a control as well,
Sure.
But that's just we're comparing the yield of the weed-free control to those herbicide treatments.
Wow. And you've just completed harvest here recently. And tell us a little bit about that side of the research and the harvesting. What are you looking for? What are you discovering there?
So during the harvest process in sweet potato harvesting, we have what is called a digger. So a tractor is pulling, I guess you can call it a trailer behind, and it has all these mechanisms where it'll dig up the ground, and the potatoes are going to go up this conveyor belt that is bumping on the way up, so therefore most of the soil particles will fall off the potatoes. And then there will be people like me and other people in my group, helpers up there grabbing the potatoes, and we're putting them into crates for each different plot that we have in the field. And then those are taken to the storage facility and cured for Normally around a week. It really just varies. And that is when the curing process occurs at a high humidity and a temperature around 85 degrees Fahrenheit. And this just helps the starches in that potato help cure and turn into sugars. And it helps create an atmosphere where the potato can withstand longer storage periods, as well as better taste, better visual appeal, and nutrient content. So after this curing process, then we start the grading process of the potatoes. So this is another labor-intensive, at least what we're doing for my project, where we grade the potatoes based off their size and their shape. And that goes into yield as well, but then we also have the total marketable yield.
Wow. And all of that whole process that takes place is really to identify a crop or a product that's going to be appealing to that consumer when they hit the grocery store, that has the right shape and the right texture and really ultimately the right sweetness in the sweet potato, correct?
Yes, that is correct. It's definitely important to get a good looking potato, sweet potato, into the stores because people are very visual. Consumers, everyone's visual.
Right.
If you're at a store and you see a potato that's a nice orange color, a good shape, and it looks like it'd be great in a sweet potato pie, why would I grab the bag of misshapen potatoes?
Right.
So it's definitely very important. Now, those potatoes that do look a little wonky aren't always, they're not wasted. There are certain grades of potatoes that go to canning facilities and processing for different products, not just human food. Sweet potatoes are actually used in dog food, for other things like that. So,
earlier we were talking about, the majority of the sweet potatoes grown here in North America are really the orange, big sweet potatoes that we see in the grocery stores on the shelves and, also, as you mentioned, in canned products and so forth. But there's some different types and varieties of sweet potatoes out there. Share some insight with the different colors that we may explore and find out there.
So I find this part of sweet potatoes actually very fascinating because before I found myself in agriculture, I honestly just thought there was just orange sweet potato.
Sure.
But there are many different colors of sweet potatoes. You can actually find purple sweet potatoes, red sweet potatoes, as well as white sweet potatoes. And all these different types of sweet potatoes, some of them are harder to find in your normal grocery store.
Sure.
But if you do find yourself at a store that does carry them, they have very good flavors, and actually a lot of them will have different types of antioxidants. For instance, the purple sweet potato, that contains what we call anthocyanins, and those are actually antioxidants that are found in blueberries as well. So they're a very, very nutritious crop.
It continues to amaze me when we think of the old sweet potato. It's not just that candied potato any longer. There's a lot of powerful benefits from a health perspective for that particular product.
Yes, sweet potatoes are extremely healthy. They are known for their very high beta-carotene content, which turns into vitamin A in the body, so vitamin A content. They're very high in potassium as well, fiber, and also vitamin A. So they're a very, very nutritious crop, and you get all these nutrients packed into one, I would say little potato, but there are some bigger potatoes too. But I mean, if you're at Thanksgiving dinner and you're eating a sweet potato casserole, sweet potato pie, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, this is so delicious, and you're like, oh, it must not be healthy because it tastes so good. Well, it is actually. You're getting jam-packed full of nutrients in that potato.
Well, definitely a lot of benefits with sweet potatoes, and kind of going back to some of the research that you're doing, some pretty exciting stuff that you're, doing that background research to come up with different, methods, herbicides, if you will, that can help control the weed population for those sweet potato growers, not just in Mississippi, but really across the country. We mentioned Mississippi is definitely a leading state, as is California and North Carolina and several other states. But what does the research look like at this stage in the game? How many more years of research do you have to come up with your final conclusion?
So I like to say research is never completed because, of course, especially in agriculture, there's always something that we could make better. Everything's changing. The world is changing. Climate is changing. People's perspectives are changing. So research never completely ends. But going back to it, my specific project, I have 3 more semesters left in this. So we're finishing up run 1 in year 1 of the field trial, and run 2 will occur next summer. So that will be the end of that herbicide trial. That's not to say that someone else will come and pick it up and add more chemistries or
Continue
make
that journey, correct?
Yes, continue that research on those.
Excellent. And you're pretty excited about what you're seeing today.
Yes. No, very. I think sweet potatoes have, to me, it seems like people are more aware of them and cooking with them more. And this is just a personal observation. And it makes me happy because, I mean, there's so much work and labor and inputs that go into the production of a sweet potato, and the health benefits the consumer is getting from this is amazing. And it makes me very happy to see people interested in eating the sweet potatoes and sharing their recipes. It's all around very good.
Wow, that's exciting stuff. Well, Alyssa Miller, a PhD weed science student at Mississippi State, I want to thank you for coming in today to share your insight on sweet potatoes and some of the research that you're doing at Mississippi State for this particular industry.
Thank you so much for having me, and it makes me very happy to talk about taters on this podcast, and I hope everyone can enjoy some potatoes, sweet potatoes on their Thanksgiving plates.
Perfect. And now we drive on up to Nashville to catch up with Jody Lawrence. Jody, welcome back to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody this Thanksgiving week. And hope everybody is going to have safe travels and a good time with their friends and family.
Well, we're certainly making this a holiday special here. We just finished up some episodes around sweet potatoes. And Jody, there's a lot of sweet information coming out of D.C. right now, as there's a lot of details coming out in terms of who's going to be appointed to who and what, and lots of noise being made. How's the markets reacting to this, Jody?
Well, it's interesting to say the least, because if you go back to the cabinet appointees, you started with kind of the earthquake for the biofuel industry with Lee Zeldin at EPA, who is a staunch critic and has been his entire political career. He is a New York representative, Republican, a strong Trump ally through the years. So you start there because how he moves forward with 45Z, or at least his support or opposition to it, goes a long way. Then you've got Robert Kennedy at Health and Human Services, who is non-GMO. He wants everything healthier. He wants less preservatives. He wants all kinds of changes in how the food system and what the standards are in the United States. And, the question that you really have to ask everybody, that I think the U.S. agriculture in general, we do a poor job of, is just reminding everybody that there are certain things. We could not feed the world without some of these things. For every pro, there's a con. And would I rather have fresh vegetables every day? Absolutely. But the reality is that by the time it goes from farm to table, you got to have something in it to preserve it, or we would have such a massive amount of spoilage that half the world would slip into a problem. So he's going to be interesting. The whole Elon Musk, Ramaswamy government efficiency department is going to become really interesting on, are they going to go in and start cutting programs, cutting public funding? And is that public funding, a lot of the Farm Bill stuff where they're direct payments? There's still unknowns in this, but you start stacking stuff up. Then we got to this weekend's announcement about Brooke Rollins from Texas, who she is so uniquely qualified because she grew up on a farm.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that, I can't really find that she has, other than another long-term supporter of Trump, somebody who is going to talk and sell his agenda through the USDA. And if you tie all this together, you look at somebody like Kip Tom, who would have been an incredibly qualified person to be Secretary of the USDA, farmer huge farmer out of Indiana, successful everywhere else that everything he's ever done. But to have, a lot of people with no unique ideas of their own, that whatever President Trump's agenda is going to be, as far as all this is concerned, you really start going out that there's a lot of clouds still in the air that we can't see through just yet. And then Scott Bessent for Treasury over the weekend is hopefully maybe kind of a calming pick, because he is not let's just use the hammer of tariffs every time we can. He's more of a layered use of them. He's a billionaire investor, another long-term supporter of Trump. And is he a calming voice in this, to where we have more negotiation and we revisit something like phase one with China to get trade heading back in the right direction with China? So there are a lot of intangibles in this. And then one of the big ones, the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, is now from a big ag state, and he certainly has got a very pro-ag background, that he is going to wield an awful lot of power on how all of these departments, what is approved, what is run through, what is passed by the Senate. So I wish I had a chart to be able to connect the dots of where we're going to be, a month after inauguration. But right now, all we have is names moving around the board. We can't see, the ultimate conclusion to the game.
It certainly is a bit of a chess game at this stage. And as you mentioned, inauguration first week in January or so. And a lot of these folks will be, getting vetted out, and then, likely being appointed as we move into January into their roles. So lots to learn here. But Jody, how are the markets reacting to some of this news?
Well, this is typically a very slow week, and the fact that Thanksgiving is later this year, where we do not have that one extra week between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we've kind of jammed some stuff in here. You look at it today, we're recording this on the 25th. A month from today is Christmas,
right?
Which is hard to believe, where the 11 months of 2024 have gone. Their hangout corn's doing extremely well. We still have a lot of export demand, certainly better than last year, but you can't call it record by any stretch. It's just relative to last year that it's better. And we also have to, figure out through the tea leaves of all these appointees, is Mexico going to continue to buy up front of the inauguration, in fear that there may be some repercussions, to immigration and other things that are obviously going to be big issues with Mexico. So, but corn's holding up. But I hate to be enthusiastic about 425 corn, because I know very few people I talk to somehow think that's a magic sweet spot where they're going to be able to make a bunch of money, unless they just have, another great yielding year like this year. And wheat is at the mercy of Russia, and they've got plenty of cheap wheat that's still going out there. You certainly have got to look at that, as, Trump says he can end that in 24 hours. If there's no conflict in Russia, Ukraine, then there's no threat that the wheat from that area gets interrupted. And you have a hard time finding a bullish story if that war ends quickly.
Right. Boy, and you nailed it. We're 30 days from Christmas. And when you really peel that onion back, we look at the number of work days. Not a lot of days to get stuff done, both legislatively as well as from the trade side of things, too.
You start compressing this, because the only positive thing about this is, historically, December, from Thanksgiving Friday through December, seasonally is a fairly bullish cycle. So we'll see if we can get corn to go back and test the highs. Certainly, if anybody sees March futures, they closed today at 433, and the 445 to 450 range, I'm going to be encouraging more sales. Beans, weather's perfect in South America, so anything you see over $10 on the futures, you may just have to go do some hard math and figure out where some break evens are to at least get your foot in the door, because at this rate, you start looking ahead to what the insurance rates are going to be for 25 and the February averages. And if they don't have a weather problem, You could have a $9 insurance average for beans, and you could have a $3.90 average for corn. And that insurance, as far as being able to help you on the revenue side, is practically useless.
Yeah. And all of this cloud, if you will, is kind of hanging over us right now. Just the likelihood of a farm bill right now is pretty much slim and none as we go into this lame duck session.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the big carrot that's out there that you look at, especially with Lee Zeldin out there, because he'll get the ear of the new Treasury guy, the 45Z. That's where for the biofuel standards and mandates, and that still is supposed to be approved by the end of the year, and that's on Treasury's desk. So you don't know if they push it to let the new administration decide on it in January, or if the old administration just decides to put a stamp on it and push it through. So yeah, I would love to have more information and certainly more positive news, but that's just where we are right now.
Yep, we're kind of in that hurry up and wait holiday season, lame duck season, if you will. And boy, some of those decisions in D.C., along with weather patterns and as well as the global unrest, is still going to make a heck of a lot of noise here over the next 30 days and really drive these markets as we really look into the new year of 2025.
Absolutely. So we'll just keep looking forward and try to get some smoke to clear and see where we are in 6 weeks when inauguration rolls around.
You bet. Jody Lawrence from Nashville. Jody, want to thank you for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. Be sure to subscribe to the FieldLink podcast so you don't miss an episode of the latest in agriculture news, markets, and products that help feed, fuel, and clothe our nation.